Good evening and welcome back to another edition of the League Winners Fantasy Show. I'm your host, as always, Dalton Salings, and I promised a special surprise, and we have a returner to the show, friend of the program, Aidan Welsh. Aidan, thank you so much for stopping by.
Yes, thank you for having me. You were hyping me up these past couple episodes, and I feel the pressure, but I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we got a good episode in store for you today. We're kind of continuing the theme here. Aidan's representing my New York Giants as we dive into the NFC East. Very excited about this. There's a lot of fantasy relevant players, of course, in the NFC East. We're going to be focusing pretty heavily on the wide receivers. A lot of interesting wide receiver rooms, a lot of question marks. We're going to break it all down for you, and you don't have to just listen to me talk today. We'll have another voice filling in the blanks. But without further ado, we're going to dive into the Philadelphia Eagles. I said we're going to talk about receivers. That's right where we're going to start. The big news, what was it, June 1st? A.J. Brown traded to the Patriots. Writing was on the wall for a long time. Everyone knew it was coming, but it became official. And that means it's an all-new wide receiver room. It's been a few years now of you stat out the Eagles. You got A.J. Brown as the one. Devonta Smith is the two. Now Devonta Smith is the one. We don't know what exactly that's going to entail, but he's being drafted as a top receiver. He's going right now in the wide receiver, between wide receiver 11 and wide receiver 14 in most drafts. So it's a high draft cost for a guy who's been a career wide receiver too. Now, if you were to tell me T. Higgins was a one, I'd be excited. Devonta Smith, is it the same thing? For me, I'm on the fence. Aidan, what are your looks as Devonta Smith's first season as a one?
Yeah, I think he's getting a lot of draft hype, and I think he's honestly being drafted too high. If you look at the receivers around him, you look at, you see the T. Higgins around him, you see the Ted McMillans around him, you see the Chris Olaves. I'd rather have those guys. So I think he's getting too high of a hype. He doesn't have A.J. Brown across the field from him. He's going to get the one all the time on defense, So I think he's being drafted too high.
Yeah, I don't hate that take at all. I have him for a little over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns this year, about 11 and a half fantasy points per game. That's good production. That's good production, but it's very similar to what we've seen from Smith through his entire career. Now, I would like to say that he's been underestimated since college. He was the undersized, skinny receiver that went on to win the Heisman Trophy, so he's been underestimated before. I just don't think he's going to have that big of an impact. I would see the Eagles leaning a little bit more on the ground game, and it's not like the receiver room's empty. They spent first-round draft capital on Mekhi Lemon this year, who I do have projected for a pretty good season, right around 7 fantasy points per game, 645 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He's not stepping into the Devonta Smith role or the A.J. Brown role, so it'll be interesting to see kind of where he falls in this offense. But, Aidan, what are you kind of thinking about Lemon?
Yeah, I'm right around the same yardage, around 600 yards for Lemon. I only have him at 3 touchdowns. I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to throw a lot of touchdowns this year. So I have him lower and also Devonta Smith lower on touchdowns. But around the same yardage, over a little over 1,000 for Smith. And I think Lemon's going to be a great addition across the field. First round talent, but he's a rookie. You're going to get the ups and downs with the rookies. Doesn't have too much size. But he's a great receiver. USC, he was balling out. So I definitely like him, but he's a rookie. So I don't think he's going to have, the greatest of years, but he's a wide receiver too in a great system. So
yeah, that's absolutely true. He's right now the third receiver or rookie receiver off the board behind Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson. So it is interesting to see if that price kind of rises. When camp comes around, there are going to be a lot of positive reports about him. You know that the beat reporters are going to be loving the way he plays. An explosive rookie wide receiver always draws highlights, especially in the non-contact camp practices where you can't hit him. He's going to get a lot of positive reports. That draft price is going to rise. That's what worries me more than anything. Right now, I think it's about fair, maybe a little expensive. The rookie costs you a little bit more because people don't know what he is, but I could see his draft price rising. The other receivers in this room, Dontavian Wicks, maybe. Yeah, but you're not going to be drafting him or Hollywood Brown in your drafts. I don't think there's too much to talk about there. You mentioned Jalen Hurts, and we're going to transition there right now. Jalen Hurts is a guy who's had his fantasy value come from rushing touchdowns over the last few years. The tush push being the unstoppable play that gets Jalen Hurts a touchdown from the 1-yard line every time. It wouldn't be surprising to see this team rely on the ground and maybe rely on Jalen Hurts' legs a little bit more outside of the red zone. Is that something you expect to see this year?
Oh, definitely. I definitely see an increase in the ground game for Jalen Hurts. I see his passing game slightly, a little teetered back. Losing your number one receiver is going to take a step back, but I definitely see that tush push working, and I have him right around 20 touchdowns passing for the year.
Yeah, I have him at 3,500 yards, 22 touchdowns, so just a little bit higher up, but not too far up. Rushing wise, I have him for 7 rushing touchdowns, which is a good amount for a quarterback, but would be honestly a little disappointing for Jalen Hurts, just based on what we've seen in recent years. He is going right now in the QB5 to QB7 range. Just a little parallel guy here. He's going right around Caleb Williams. Are you preferring Jalen Hurts or Caleb Williams this year?
Yeah, I like Caleb Williams. I like Justin Herbert. I like both of those guys over.
Okay.
So they're both going. I have them after, just after. So I like both those guys over him. Like I said, I don't expect his passing to be as good this year. So
interesting. I'm going to be on the flip side of that. I mean, I talked about it in the NFC North episode, kind of my worries with Caleb Williams' upside, but you look at weapons, you look at talent, there's an argument that Caleb Williams is a leg up in both. It's the rushing to where it's going to come down. I think Hurts does just enough to edge him out, but it is a high draft cost at quarterback for a guy who doesn't have the same upside we've seen in the past. He doesn't have a guy that you know is going to get 1,000 yards and catch 10 touchdowns. Do they suffer in the red zone because of the fact that they don't have that big body receiving threat? Or is Dallas Goedert a beneficiary of that? Are we going to see a Dallas Goedert touchdown season? I have him for 5 touchdowns this year. Nothing special, but that's an increase because A.J. Brown is out the door. I have him for about 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, 7.2 fantasy points. I think he's being a little bit underdrafted right now. One of the only assets in this offense that goes undervalued because of the rookie Eli Stowers, who was drafted. There's been a lot of reports from the beat reporters that aren't very positive about Eli, and that surprised me. I mean, he's a young guy. Typically, you love that stuff, but they're warning that he might not be on the field as much as people think. Do you believe that Stowers might be held back or might be holding back Goddard a little bit this year, or is that not something you're worried about?
I'm not worried about it at all. Second round pick is a high draft pick for a tight end, but I believe that Dallas Goedert is one of those ones that is going to take a step up from this AJ Brown departure. So I believe that Goddard would be fine. He'll be that red zone threat, like you're saying. I have him for 6 touchdowns and about 600 yards, just like you had. So I think Goddard would be, a good tight end this year to have.
Yeah, see, it stinks I'm playing in fantasy leagues with this guy because he seems to agree with me on a lot of stuff. But if you look at the backfield, kind of the last thing here in Philadelphia, Saquon Barkley is back another year. When you start getting into the age where Saquon Barkley is, it becomes not so much a question of talent, but is he going to be able to stay on the field? He hasn't had a lot of injury history since he's gotten to Philly. Obviously, with the Giants, it was different when he was getting banged up behind the line of scrimmage every play. But since he's gotten to Philly, it's been a lot smoother sailing in terms of health for Saquon Barkley. If he's healthy, I think he's very productive. He's still a threat out of the backfield in the receiving game, and he's a strong rusher. I have him for 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns, as well as 36 catches and 2 more scores there. So that's a little over 14.5 fantasy points per game. That's good production. He's costing you a second-round pick right now, which is fair value for a running back of his caliber. Are you in on Barkley this year? Or are you out?
I am in on Barkley. I believe, I had him the same numbers as you, a little less yards. I had 1,200 yards. He might miss a couple quarters or something, late in games or whatever. The one thing that, does scare me is, like you said, he's been healthy with the Eagles, and I think it's, about due. So that leads me to the backup. Do you think it's worth drafting Tank Bigsby as a handcuff?
I don't mind Tank Bigsby. Now, I think this is actually, I'm glad you used the word handcuff, because I think that does bring up a nice conversation about, do you handcuff your own running backs? If you draft Saquon Barkley in the second, are you targeting Tank Bigsby? And I think that depends on what kind of fantasy player you are. Are you in a league where there's a punishment that you're doing everything you can to avoid, or are you in a league where you're trying to win? And there's no shame in trying to avoid last, right? We're in a fantasy baseball league together. I'm currently doing everything in my power to avoid the basement. But if you're playing to avoid last, drafting your handcuff is the smartest thing you can do. The last thing you want is your first, second-round pick going down and you just being out a player, and you're taking a 0 and you just lost. If you draft Barkley, draft Tank Bigsby on the late rounds, you're taking that out of play. Bigsby is going to be the guy should Barkley go down, at least on the ground. He's not the same receiving threat, but on the ground, he's the same thing. But if you're trying to win, what does it get you if Barkley goes down and you replace him with Bigsby? That's worse play. That's worse play. You can't play like my best player's going to get injured. What you do is you draft someone else's handcuff. Aidan takes Barkley. Okay, I'm going to take Tank Bigsby. I'm going to have my, Omarion Hampton. And then if Barkley goes down, I just added the Eagles RB1. Yeah. And yes, if Hampton goes down, I'm screwed. But you're playing to win. You're not playing to not get last. So I think that actually just really depends. I have a decent season with Bigsby. Not a guy you're going to play, a standalone. If Barkley's healthy, he's not playable. But even with Barkley, I think he's the next guy up. I have him with 90 carries, 400 yards, a couple scores. I think he's a talented player, a talented enough player. There's a reason he's not still in Jacksonville. But I think he's a talented enough player that should Barkley go down, he's valuable. If you want to try and take someone's handcuff, there's really maybe 3 or 4 running backs that you look at their backup as a true, just a handcuff, I might take them. You could, Isaiah Pacheco with Gibbs or Brian Robinson with Bijan. Those kind of guys are like, that's a top running back. They're not going to come off the field. Yeah. Barkley's in that category, so Bigsby is truly a handcuff. I don't mind handcuffing somebody else if I'm trying to win the league and grabbing Bigsby with a late pick just in case Barkley goes down. He will go undrafted a lot, though. I expect Bigsby to not be in the 15 rounds of redraft leagues. It's a waiver wire name to keep an eye on. Should Barkley go down, and I see that's the only way I see him gaining value is if Barkley goes down. But if Barkley goes down, keeping an eye on Bigsby could be very important. And the passing game work would go to Will Shipley. I have very little projected of him because, once again, if Barkley's healthy, it's not happening. But if we see Hurts hit the checkdowns a little bit more, Will Shipley could be in, and this is a very hot take. I don't believe this to be true, but the ceiling of Will Shipley is like a last year Kenneth Gainwell, in my opinion, where there's a good receiving back ahead of him, but he comes in for third down work. And if Hurts is hitting checkdowns, I think he's a good enough pass catcher to make that work.
Yeah, it's very generous. I think very generous for giving him Kenneth Gainwell. But like you said, they're going to rely on the ground game. So if Barkley goes down, you got to one of those guys is going to step up. I even think about if you have Tank Bigsby, if you have someone's handcuff, would you trade him? Would you use that as a trade piece? People overreact to big injuries. So you can even use that as a trade piece to, I don't know, potentially go get a low RB1 that is the one in their system or something. So I think, having the handcuff of Bigsby might be good in last round, something like that. Waiver wire pickup, like you said, but it could be a good piece to have on your roster. But if Barkley stays healthy, I think Barkley has a great year and the Eagles rely on this run game.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that closes up Philly for us as we move towards Dallas. Since wide receivers is the theme, that's where we're going to start. This has an argument to be the most talented receiver room in the NFL. This and Cincinnati, I think, are the two teams that you can look to as the best receiver rooms. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens are both being drafted as top 10 wide receivers right now. I love Dak Prescott. Not really that much because I'm a Giants fan, but he's going to throw the leather off of the football. And I just don't know if he can support two top 10 fantasy wide receivers. Think about what that means. Two top 10 guys. I mean, it would take an astronomical season. And the argument is Lamb went down last year, but was on pace for the great season. Mm-hmm. And then Pickens had the great season. Mm-hmm. If both are healthy, they both sustain it. I'll give my projections and then turn it over to you. I have Lamb, 95 catches, 1,250 yards, 7 scores. Pickens, 77 catches, 1,200 yards, 7 scores. I have them very close together, which scares the crap out of me. I just want to know what you see in this receiver room.
I'm just laughing because I have CeeDee Lamb at 1,250 yards and I have George Pickens at 1,200 yards. Yep. So we have the same amount of yardage projected. That's ironic. But yeah, I think Dak Prescott, I think this season he's going to pass the Dallas Cowboys all-time touchdown record, beat Tony Romo, pass Tony Romo's record of all-time touchdowns in Dallas. I think he's going to have a great year. I really do. He's been disappointing. He's either on or off. If he gets injured, he's good. If he gets injured, he's bad. If he doesn't, he's good. I think he's going to have a great year. He's going to support both these receivers, and that they're going to have a great year as an offense.
Yeah. So here's a question just to throw it back to you. Do you think this is something where in a redraft league where you're having to start these guys every week, and of course, you're drafting them top 10 receivers, you're starting them every week, but you're going to be frustrated weeks when one guy gets 2 touchdowns and the other one only has 4 catches for 50 yards. Is that going to be a thing, or is it going to be consistent production?
Yeah, I think it is going to be a thing. Even last year when Lamb came back, I was getting mad, and George Pickens is going off for 3 touchdowns, and I have Lamb. So I think it is going to be a thing this year, but it's going to be one you live with because you're going to have the opposite week where your guy's going off and the other guy's not. So I think it's going to be something you live with. But it's the risk you play. You take him, I guess Chase is a better talent level, but you take a Higgins where he'll have a week where he goes off, but he doesn't. It's that same when you have 2 great receivers, it's just hard to keep them every week together. So
that's very fair. And I just think they kind of hold each other back a little bit more than anything. I think both can have great seasons, like Aidan was saying, but it is a little challenging just to have 2 guys of this talent level in the same receiver room. The draft price is really just what gives me pause because you're taking Lamb in the range of Amon-Ra and Justin Jefferson. And both of those guys are the clear ones on their teams. And you're taking Pickens, just behind Drake London and Nico Collins, and just ahead of the likes of, Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, Devonta Smith comes into play there too. It's you can talk yourself into it. You can talk yourself into this offense and into this passing game, but do you use that draft capital on these guys, make the high pick? It's going to be a gamble. And if it hits, it's going to pay off for you wonderfully because this could be the best offense in football. I think it's possible, and it could pay off. The third receiver, I think, is a big beneficiary of this, actually, Ryan Flournoy, who I found myself in late in best ball drafts just grabbing a share of because I do think Dak Prescott's going to throw the ball a lot. I think he could see 70 targets as the wide receiver 3. I think if everyone's healthy, he could see 70 targets. And if somebody goes down, Flournoy steps in as the number 2 on a good offense. And I think you can look at this, the argument with Andre Yosevas in Cincinnati and say he's the 3. I don't think he's the same talent level as Ryan Flournoy is. Flournoy has gotten a lot of positive reports. I have him for just over 6 fantasy points a game, 550 yards and 4 touchdowns. The Cowboys are going to run 3 receiver sets. They're going to throw the football. He can, I think, be fantasy relevant. Do you kind of have that same opinion of him?
Same thing. You said it perfectly. I wouldn't add anything else. It kind of reminds me of Tyler Boyd. I think that's from Cincinnati back in the day. That kind of vibe. He's going to be a 3rd receiver, but he can step up to that wide receiver 2 some games. Even if someone gets injured, he'll be that permanent wide receiver 2. So you said it perfectly.
Yeah, it's right on the money there. And then we'll talk about Dak while we're on the receiver conversation. Dak Prescott is one of my most off ADP projections. I have him well above where he's being drafted because I have him throwing 4,700 yards. I have him throwing 4,700 yards and 31 touchdowns which he doesn't even have to run the ball to be fantasy relevant. I'm at 18.5 points. I'm lapping Jalen Hurts. He's going right now on underdog as right ahead of Justin Herbert, the QB8, I believe. And that, in my opinion, is just such a good cost. And I'm not drafting as much of him as I should be because I'm terrified that I'm way too high on him and I'm wrong. But man, if he's healthy, what's going to stop him from throwing 4,700 yards?
Nothing will stop him from throwing that many yards. I'm with you. Dak's gonna have a great year. I have him for 4,400 yards, not as quite as high as you, but I'm more conservative with my things. I won't divvy off the average as much. So yeah, I think he's gonna have a great year. He's getting a little older, which kind of worries me on the ground game, like you said. But Dak doesn't use a ground game. He doesn't need one. He's not one of those dual threat quarterbacks. He can get in there occasionally, but his arms there, and that's all he really needs.
Yeah, I mean, to close out the passing game, it's Jake Ferguson at tight end. He's another guy. Tight end is one of the most weirdly valued positions this year, in my opinion. There's the top couple guys, and don't get me wrong, I love me some Brock Bowers, some Trey McBride. And then there's the last year rookies. You got the Colston Lovelands, the Fannons, the Tyler Warrens. Yep, you got those guys. And then you have like a weird gap. And then like Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid,
Kraft.
Jake Ferguson. Tucker Kraft's a little bit higher. He kind of falls in a weird in between. He's in that weird gap in between. But it's like, man, if I don't get Bowers or McBride, I'm punting down and taking Ferguson.
Yeah.
I have him at 8 fantasy points. And once again, I'm too high on Dak, but 600 yards and 7 touchdowns is well within the realm of possibility for Jake Ferguson. He's the best red zone threat on this team, in my opinion, in the passing game. And he's a proven good player. They don't have a lot else going on at tight end. Luke Schoonmaker doesn't scare me in the slightest. Ferguson feels like a value.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, you punt tight end down the road and you pick up with Ferguson. You pick up, the guys in that area like we talked about with Goddard. And they're going to have a great year. They have a good quarterback. They're going to have a great year. I have 600 yards just like you do. I have 5 touchdowns, a little less. But, he's going to have a great year. He has Dak Prescott as a quarterback. We both project Dak to have a great year. Tight end, number one, no one really behind him to take any reps away. He'll have a great year catching the football.
Yeah, I feel like I project the Cowboys offense like I project the Dolphins offense. But we'll go to the running game. Javonte Williams is the guy here. I'm not going to dwell on him too long just because he's proven he can be the guy. He kicked Rico Dowdle out the door earlier and then just held off Jaden Blue and Malik Davis last year. I have him for over 200 carries this year and 35 catches, about over 10.5 fantasy points per game on the ground. He's not a sexy pick. It's Javonte Williams. You see him struggle in Denver. He played well last year, but it's like, oh, what am I doing? It's Javonte Williams, and he's going in a range of Josh Jacobs right now, which is weird because the whole Josh Jacobs off the field stuff kind of pushed Jacobs down, but he's going like right before Cam Skattebo. We'll talk about Cam Skattebo right here in just a minute, but I would much rather Javonte Williams than Cam Skattebo. It feels like he's a pick that you leave your draft and you don't even think about it again. Like it's like I made that pick, and then by week 4, you're like, man, I know ball. I took Javonte Williams.
Yeah, I really don't have an opinion on him either. He's going in that range of Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, Cam Skattebo, like you said. And those first 2 names, like, it's a toss-up for me. I really don't have an opinion. He could have a great year. He could have a dud year. You said it perfectly. I'd like him over Skattebo just because injury reasons. But like you said, it's a toss-up, and you could look like an idiot, but you could also look like you're the smartest man in the league. So
yeah,
it's a swing pick.
The other running back to keep an eye on is Jaden Blue. In a redraft, you're not taking him. Like, there's no reason to handcuff the Cowboys running back, but he's just an name to keep an eye on through camp. He'll get a lot of positive reports. I'm expecting him to look better than Malik Davis. There was worries last season about his off-the-field maturity was apparently what kept him off the field. So I have to assume he's going to get better. I mean, you can't say anything with the NFL, but you assume he's going to get better at that. And he could cut into Javonte's workload just to keep Javonte fresh. If the Cowboys are successful and have a high-powered offense, we could see Javonte getting a little bit more rest and Jaden Blue kind of being able to take those carries, but not somebody you're looking to draft, more of just a name to keep an eye on in this backfield. Let's transition into the New York Giants. That's my team. Aiden's rocking them today on the shirts, but man, there are some injury question marks on this one. I mean, the elephant in the room is Malik Neighbors. We talked about this off camera a little bit. I'll just kind of explain the question and then I'll throw it over to Aidan to talk about him, but I have no idea what's going on with his knee. He had the AC, blew out the ACL, not what you want to do during the season, had the procedure, got surgery, had a second procedure at the start of the offseason. You don't want to see that. The latest update was, Brian Burns had a charity softball match, and Malik Neighbors looked like an 80-year-old man. He's on the pup for sure. And then this week, John Harbaugh comes out and says he's good to go at the start of training camp. I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor. I watched that man move. I can't imagine he's playing anytime soon, but I got to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, I think the fans want to hear what you think, but I'll be short here. Um, I don't care about it. If you're getting him in the fourth round, draft Malik Neighbors in the fourth round. If he's falling to the fourth round, draft him. If he's falling to the third round, I say draft him. I'm a huge Malik Neighbors fan. If he's out 1 week, if he's on pup, if he's out 6 weeks, if he's out whatever, Malik Neighbors is a fantasy winner this year. So I would take share in that, especially with the value dropping. You take him in the fourth round, like I would take a receiver one in the fourth round for sure. So I want to spin this back to you.
Yeah.
You're the Giants guy. How do you feel? Because I'm optimistic about it. I think his knee's okay. If the head coach is telling me, new head coach, doesn't really know him, but if he's telling me he's good and he's falling to the fourth round, sometimes it's late third, but sometimes fourth, I'm drafting him.
When we get to the Commanders, I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't draft until late August. Malik Neighbors is why you should draft right now, because it's either his draft price is either going to go way up, but it's probably not going to fall further than this. If it comes out he's at camp and he's moving and he looks good, he's going back up to the second round immediately. And yes, draft him now. But I also have been telling everyone I know not to draft him. I have the complete opposite view of you here. I think he's going to be out 6 weeks. And I think if he's out 6 weeks, you are shooting yourself in the foot drafting him in the fourth round. I think there are still names in the fourth round that could be top 12 wide receivers on the season. Are you going to take a knee on 0 points for 4 to 6 weeks out of a guy that you're drafting to be a starting receiver? I just don't think it's worth it. And also, my worry is he comes back. Let's say they give him 6 weeks. Let's say he only needs 4, but they give him 6. They want him back 100%. Re-aggravation on stuff like that, if he tweaks it in the slightest, the Giants, let's be honest with each other, are not going to be a competitive team this year. We are not expected to be a strong team this year, a playoff contender, anything like that. There's no reason for the Giants not to shut Malik Neighbors down at the first sign of something going wrong this season. I feel like you could be drafting a guy who misses the first 6 weeks and the last 6 weeks, and you're eating a 0 in the fourth round when you can get, a Terry McLaurin. Like, that's a guy that you can feel consistent about.
Yeah, so looking at the guys drafted around him, you said Scary Terry, you see the Jalen Waddle, you see the Luther Burdens. There's a lot of question marks in that area. You see Luther Burden, can he take that wide receiver one role? You see Scary Terry, last year injured a lot of the year. Will he step back? Will he jump back into it? You see Jalen Waddle, new team. He has Cortland Sutton across the field. How's that going to work out? You see like Devontae Adams coming off injury also. Great year last year, a lot of touchdowns, but is that going to sustain? So I think there's a lot of question marks in the area that he's being drafted. And I say I like his question mark most because I believe he has the most upside. Out of all the receivers I named, he has the most upside. And if he's there week 1, you hit the lottery, But if he's there week 6, you take a fallback. But, it all depends on how he comes back from the injury. You said he might not move like, normal Malik Neighbors would move. But I think he has the most upside out of all those question marks, and I would go with him.
Yeah, he does have the most upside. That I will give you that 100%. There's nobody else in that tier. There's not many guys in the NFL that can do what he does when he's healthy. Very true. My worry is, especially in redraft, is you draft him, you feel good, you're like, he's going to maybe miss a little time. And then week 3 rolls around, and you're 0-3, and it's, do I trade Neighbors? Do I move off of Neighbors? And it's like, man, you not only did you waste 3 weeks, but now the temptation to trade him so high because you are behind. You're behind the 8 ball. Oh, it's week 3. He's supposed to be back week 4. Oh, man, there's an update. He's set back week 6. Mm-hmm. Okay, do you hold on to him for 6 weeks and potentially – if you're 0-6, you're out. You're not going to make the playoffs from 0-6. You know what I'm saying? And you could, of course, win weeks with a player being out. That's not what I'm saying at all. But he is the highest upside, but he's so far the lowest floor that I'm out on him. But I think an interesting conversation, assuming he misses sometime, because I think we can agree there's a good chance he misses sometime. Who's the guy that steps up? Man, I wish my team was better, so I can have a strong answer to that. Darnell Mooney, I guess. That's what I have projected. Looking at my numbers for this receiving room, it's pathetic. Since I have Neighbors, I expect Neighbors to miss 6 weeks. I have him for 6 fantasy points per game on a per 17 basis, just because I have him only playing 11 games. The next highest receiver is 4.8 out of Darnell Mooney. I don't even have confidence in that. Is he the guy that is he the one? I don't know. There's so many options. I'll just run through the names. I want to hear your thoughts on them, but it's Darnell Mooney, it's Darius Slayton, it's Calvin Austin, it's Malachi Fields, and I'm not going to talk about the other 2 veterans that we signed because I don't think either of them are – they might make the roster, but I really hope they're not getting minutes this year or getting snaps this year. But, man, who's the number 2 guy?
When the Giants signed or got Darnell Mooney this offseason, I thought, boom, there's your Wan'Dale Robinson. He's going to go for a lot of yards. Wan'Dale had 1,000 last year. Maybe not that much, but he's going to go for a lot of yards, the replacement. But the more time seeps in, it's like I've seen him play for the Falcons. It's not the Bears on a Mooney. You're not getting Bears on a Mooney. So I think the number one is week one. If Neighbors is not there, I think Slayton steps up as the wide receiver one. The veteran presence. Dalton off camera mentioned new coach, so it's not really like a coach thing going on there. But I think the veteran presence still gets him that wide receiver one. In at least the first couple of weeks. I think Mooney could step into it. Weeks 4 to 6 if Neighbors is out 6 weeks. So I think long term Mooney will be the one, but I think short term start of the season I like Slayton.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I'm not as in on Slayton just because I've watched a lot of Giants football. But I think Mooney's more talented. Slayton could start as the one. The question is, in a lot of teams, you're drafting a later guy or a guy that's not a top talented guy. It's with hopes that they're an end of season play. If one of my guys goes down, you can play him. But with the Giants, it's different because of the question marks with Neighbors week one. It becomes, okay, I'm maybe drafting this guy who I'm hoping could play or be productive week one because if you're drafting, let's say Mooney, and you draft Mooney and you say, okay, I need him to be the guy by week 4. Hopefully he's the guy. So when bye weeks come around, I can play him. Well, the Neighbors is back. So even if he becomes the guy, he's the 2, right? And so it makes it really hard in the Giants receiving room, especially in redraft, to say, am I going to start Darius Slayton into my flex week 1? I mean, I sure hope not, right? But if he's the one receiver on a team, I mean, he's going to be the latest drafted wide receiver 1 then because he'll go after Malik Washington does. And so that's where the difficulty comes in. In best ball, I've drafted a lot of Darnell Mooney, a lot of Malachi Fields, the rookie who I could see being the 2 at the end of the year, which in best ball, I don't have to pick when to start him. He'll just get put in my lineup. But it's weird with the Giants because you're not necessarily drafting for the end of season upside. You're drafting for right away, but a guy that you don't really like. I'll ask it straight up. Would you feel comfortable starting a Giants wide receiver not named Malik Neighbors in week 1?
I would say no. And you mentioned Malachi Fields. I'm not a big rookie guy. As you saw with Lemon from the Eagles, I'm not a huge rookie guy. I don't like drafting rookies. I think their value they have too much value. They get drafted too high because of the name. We saw them in college last year, and it's just a different game. So I'm not a big rookie guy. I would not draft. I'm not drafting Malachi Fields in any best ball drafts or anything like that right now. I would not feel comfortable starting any wide receiver for the Giants in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you, and that just makes it such a sticky situation to try and pinpoint who it's going to be because at the end of the day, it's going to be nobody. The guy it might be is Isaiah Likely. The tight end came with Harbaugh over. He's now my highest projected pass catcher on the Giants. I mean, he's my second highest projected player on the Giants. Or no, that's not true. The running backs are ahead, but Likely came over from the Ravens with Harbaugh. I have him for 690 yards and 4 touchdowns, which is a good season. Once again, he's going in the Jake Ferguson, the Dallas Goedert range. I have him right around those guys when it comes to projecting. I'm behind Ferguson, right next to Goddard in my projections. Do you like Likely?
I do like Likely. Mark Andrews isn't there anymore. We talked about this off camera, but Mark Andrews isn't there anymore, and Isaiah Likely can play like himself. He's not going to be a big blocking tight end, but he's going to run you some routes. He's going to run them a lot of routes. The one question mark, or I want to ask you, like at you, is Theo Johnson going to cut into his playing time? Is Theo Johnson going to cut into any of his stats? I have Likely for 700 yards and 6 touchdowns, a little more than you in touchdowns. But I also have Theo Johnson, getting around 250 yards. So I want to know, do you think Theo Johnson's going to get less or more yards than that?
Yeah, I have Theo Johnson right around 300 yards, so just a little bit more. My biggest worry is, and I've stolen this quote. I don't remember who said it originally, but you say you can't score points for blocking in fantasy, but blocking gets you on the field. And my worry with Isaiah Likely is it's going to be clear passing situations where Likely's on the field. That he's not going to be on the field for too many running plays because he's not as strong a blocker. And that's not a hate on him at all. He's a great pass catcher. He's the best pass catching tight end the Giants have had since, I guess, Evan Ingram. Gosh, I'd hate to say that. But he's the best pass catching tight end we've had in a long time. But can he be out there on play action? Do they feel comfortable putting Isaiah Likely on the field for play action snaps? Is it a clear pass when Likely's on the field? That's my only concern. I think it's what limited him in Baltimore. Obviously, Baltimore was a very run-heavy team. They kind of used Mark Andrews in those roles. And is it going to be Theo Johnson in the, okay, we're going to run a play action, one tight end on the field and have a tight end route? Like, is he going to get those targets? That's my only worry. I don't think it cuts into Likely necessarily, but I do think, and I saw it on Twitter. I wish I could credit who said it, but they were talking about this is the year of the backup tight end touchdowns, where there's going to be so many where you're kicking yourself on the couch that you have Isaiah Likely and Theo Johnson got a 1-yard receiving touchdown. And, I could see a couple of those happening, but I don't think that I think Likely's ceiling is capped a little bit because of Theo Johnson being a very good football player, but I don't think it's going to take away too much from him. Speaking of that ground game, I want to turn it over to Cam Scatterbo and Tyrone Tracy. This is a huge gap between where these two guys are getting drafted. RB19 for Scatterbo, RB44 for Tyrone Tracy on Underdog right now. I mean, to me, that gap is way too big, but I'm curious to see what you think.
Yeah, I'm drafting a lot of Tyrone Tracy this year. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a big rookie guy. I didn't draft Scotty last year. I'm not drafting him this year either. I think he's going too high for maybe not even. He probably won't start the year. He might start the year, but I don't think he'll start the year healthy. And he's being drafted very high. He had a great rookie year, but things change. You're not going to be. Great rookie year doesn't always mean great sophomore year. So I'm not drafting any Scotty. He's getting drafted way too high for me, and Tracy's falling way too low. Like you said, that gap is huge. So I'm drafting a lot of Tracy this year. I have Tracy projected for only 500 yards. And Scotty I have for 850. More, but I believe early on, Tracy will be that talent. You can even trade him away if Scotty gets delayed a little bit. But yeah, I'm staying away from Scotty. He's going way too high for me.
I agree with you fully, and I'm even higher on Tracy than you are. My kind of thought process here is Scatterbo's the more talented player. I will give Scat that he's the more talented runner, but there is the injury history. He is a little bit older for the rookie last year. Is he going to be a workhorse? I don't know why he would be in this offense. I think it's a much more balanced rushing attack. I have Scatterbo for 800 and Tracy for 700.
Oh, wow.
So I have Tracy for 700 yards, just 3 touchdowns. I think Scat has more of the touchdowns, but even in the receiving game, I have Tracy with 42 catches to 22 for Scatterbo. And so I do think that receiving upside, I have Scatterbo projected slightly higher in terms of just total points on the season and points per game. I do think he'll be ready to go week 1. I'm a little bit more hopeful in that regard. He's doing backflips, which is the stupidest thing ever, but he's doing backflips at Fanatics Fest. I'm hoping that's a sign that he's going to be good to go, but I do think he is kind of eased back into the season. I think it is going to be a lighter workload early. At the end of the year, he could supplant, but I mean, Tyrone Tracy, I'm drafting the crap out of because he's going behind Keaton Mitchell right now.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing? What are we doing as a fantasy community to let him slide that far? I like Tyrone Tracy to be a threat in the receiving game all over the field. I think Jackson Dart has a part of this rushing game as well. He is a guy that will use his legs. He throws his shoulder into people too much. What do you have rushing-wise for Jackson Dart?
Yeah, rushing-wise for Jackson Dart, I have 400 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. Honestly, you can go up or down with that rushing touchdown number. He likes doing it. He likes getting the red zone. He likes doing it. He's done it since college. But the injury last year kind of scares me. Are they going to tell him to slow down a little bit? Are they going to hinder his rushing ability? Like I said, I have 400 yards. I'm a big Jackson Dart fan. I have been for a while. Seeing him dice up the Gators, it always hurts. But I've always been a Jackson Dart fan for a while now, and I think he has a great year on the ground. I think his passing takes a step back just because slowing down a little bit, getting more on the ground. But what do you have him for rushing?
Yeah, I have him for 560 yards on the ground.
Wow.
So my thought is Harbaugh's going to come in and preach slide, get out of bounds. I don't think they're going to try and limit his leg ability because I think that opens up his arm, right? His ability to get outside the pocket, to create on a broken down play, and to have design runs calls forces more people into the box, allows him to open up the field, especially with the receiving core we have. I think they are going to have to lean on his legs, but just emphasize he's not going to have the yards after contact. But I think he has more carries this year, which kind of opens the door to that. I have him at about 5.5 a carry. So I think he has 100 carries and just can break it open. I have 6 touchdowns as well. But I do think he's running just as much, if not more, but he's being hopefully a little bit more selective about his spots doing it. Throwing the football, I have him for 3,600 yards, which is a good season, 23 touchdowns. So the touchdowns is a little bit lower. That's kind of where I have him coming back down to earth a little bit. But 17.7 fantasy points per game. I project him for more fantasy points per game than Jalen Hurts, which I think says more about Jalen Hurts than Jackson Dart. But I'm also not drafting a lot of Jackson Dart because the injury scares me. You brought up his injury history. It does scare me a little bit, so I'm not drafting too much of him because it worries me. If I draft Dart, it's a guaranteed second quarterback, and in best ball, it's a third quarterback because I just don't trust he's going to play 17 games. But I think he's a talented player. He's a fun player. Sometimes it's fun to watch a talented guy go make plays on your fantasy team and get points for it. I'm very nervous about the start of the year, and this is honestly, I'm going to say my biggest concern with Dart before I turn it over to you because you made a face on the yards, but my biggest concern is that while he's healthy, he has worse weapons, and Neighbors comes back and it offsets with Dart getting injured. That's my biggest concern. He doesn't get to utilize Neighbors as much because I do think a lot of that passing will come later in the season with Neighbors back healthy, with having kind of his full repertoire of weapons. That's my biggest concern, but I still think that he's going to have a strong season regardless.
Yeah, I made a face in the yards. I have 3,200, like I said before. I think he doesn't play every game. I think that factors into my into my prediction. But I also think factors into his Neighbors is gone, like you said. So that definitely factors in. I only have 3,200 yards for those reasons. I have a question for you. How does this new head coach and OC duo change the offense? What happens with these new two guys in the front office?
Yeah, I think we see a more focused attack on the ground. I don't think it's going to lead to a huge shift in production. Like I talked about my thoughts on Scadaboo and Tracy, but I do think they will emphasize the ground. I just don't know that we have the offensive line talent to capitalize off of that. I think this team is a year or two away from being competitive because of that fact. If Andrew Thomas can stay healthy, that'd go a long way. But I do think it's more of an emphasis on the ground game. I think that if there's a coach that knows how to take advantage of his legs, of Dart's legs, it's going to be Harbaugh, right? He coached Lamar Jackson, so he knows how to take advantage of quarterback's legs. That's honestly, I think, the biggest thing with my quarterback rushing upside with Dart is the fact that Harbaugh will be able to know schemes to create. Obviously, it's not going to be Todd Mulkin, but he'll have the schemes to create and open up holes and do that kind of thing for Dart to take advantage with his legs. I think we just see maybe a little bit more efficient passing game. We kind of saw Dart taking too long in the pocket, taking too many hits because of that extending plays. I think we see more stuff quick. It wasn't necessarily something Lamar Jackson did too much of because, of course, he's a guy that can extend plays with his legs, but it would not surprise me to see Dart getting the ball out of his hands a little bit quicker, hitting quick stuff. The guys like Mooney, Calvin Austin can also play slot as well. Getting his balls out of his hand, getting the ball out of his hands quickly, to avoid those hits and just take advantage of the skill that our receiving room does have.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's gonna be more safe. Harbaugh's gonna preach to him, like you said, get out of bounds, slide, get rid of the ball quicker. He has to keep his body healthy, as a second year player. Just to end this, I have a question for you. Out of these four teams, who would you say I'm drafting him? Who are you drafting the most out of these four teams, and who are you fading the most?
Well, I think
Out of any players we talked about today.
one of my fades is going to be on the Commanders, who we're about to get to.
Oh, we haven't talked about Commanders.
Yeah, I want
Wow,
to
I'm
get to
getting ahead
them
of
before we
myself.
talk about that, but I am going to close with that. But I do want to talk about the Commanders, and I mean we've started in the receiver room 3 times. Let's do it a fourth. Let's talk about a guy not in the receiver room, and that's whoever they're going to sign. We assume that there's going to be a signing at receiver. I want to kind of start there. If there's a receiver signed, let's say it's Stephon Diggs or Keenan Allen. Those are looking like the 2 most likely names. Do you feel comfortable with either of those guys having a fantasy relevant season if they are signed?
I do not. I see these drafts. People are taking the Tyreek Hills, they're taking the Stephon Diggs, like you said, and I'm personally not. We don't know if they're going to sign him. They might. They have to sign somebody. This receiver room is looking very, very poor. But I just, based on that, I don't know. I'm not a big upside player. Like I'm not a big risk taker. I don't like taking risk in fantasy, especially drafting now. We're so far out. So I'm not drafting any of them. You don't know where they're going to end up. They might end up on a team with 4 receivers. They might end up on this team with 1 receiver. So I'm sorry to skip over the Commanders. By the way, I didn't want to leave you guys out. I completely forgot. But yes, I am not drafting them. What about you?
I'm not drafting them right now, and like I said, the Commanders' receiver room is a great reason why you should not draft now, and you should wait to draft at the end of August, early September, because I have no idea. I mean, what are we looking at here? We're looking at Luke McCaffrey and Antonio Williams as the 2 and 3 in some order, and I don't know who it's going to be. Like, I honestly, whoever does sign here, let's say it's Diggs or Allen, because it was going to be Brandon Ayuk, but he blew that up. Let's say it's Diggs, right? If Stephon Diggs signs there, he slides in as a wide receiver 2 and has a fantasy relevant season. But I can't draft him. What if he goes and signs with, like, I don't know, the Patriots, and he's backing up A.J. Brown, and they have Romeo Dobbs? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just too many question marks right now as to where these guys will sign. Once one signs, though, I think I would feel comfortable drafting them because they're going to be a wide receiver 2 with a solid quarterback in Jaden Daniels and with a good receiver alternating them in Terry McLaurin. And we've seen mixed production from Deebo Samuel as the wide receiver 2 in this offense, but you can get fantasy relevant production. I just don't know who it's going to be.
I'm trying to think. Last year, was there anyone that didn't sign till late, and then they signed late, and then they have a great season? Was that like a Keenan Allen? Did he do that?
He did, but he went back to the Chargers,
Okay.
and he went back to the Chargers. He got released by the Bears, went back to the Chargers, and it was more of he was already comfortable there. It can happen, and we're not late yet. Let's think about the fact that training camp is just starting. Mm-hmm. You're not missing any. You missed OTAs, but all the guys that are available still are veterans who have been on multiple teams and kind of can quickly come in and learn the playbook. I guess you're right. It does depend on when they sign, because if it's 2 weeks before the season, yeah, that's a completely different story. Mm-hmm. But if it's in these next 2 weeks, training camp just started, they're coming in and missing 1 week at camp, I feel like you have to have a little bit of confidence in them.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm not a very big risk taker in fantasy. So I personally would not be drafting them unless, like you said, they get signed now and they look good in training camp and preseason and all that. then I would draft him. But right now, I'm personally fading them. So yeah,
That's fair, and we don't play too much hypotheticals on this show. I didn't mark the AJ Brown trade until it happened, but let's say no one else signs. So let's say we have the receiving room as we see it. Terry McLaurin, I think we both agree is a good player, and he's the one on this team. We will get into our specific projections for him in a second, but who do you view as the two? I view it as Antonio Williams. You said you didn't like rookie receivers. I'm interested where you fall here.
I don't. You have like Jalen Lane also there. I'm not a big fan of Luke McCaffrey either. I think it has to be Antonio Williams. Looking at everyone else around him, there's no one really there. There's not even. I'm skipping ahead, but it's not even like a great tight end room. So I think there's no one really there. I think it's going to be Antonio Williams. I haven't projected for not even that 500 yards. 3 touchdowns. So not that great of a season, but I think it's going to be Antonio Williams to step in him as a 2.
Yeah, I have him for 450 and 3. I have him as the second player, but not fantasy relevant unless it's best ball. Once again, where those 3 weeks he catches a touchdown, you're over the moon. But yeah, I view Antonio Williams, and then Terry McLaurin he's the one here. I have him a little bit low, and I'll kind of circle back to that in my Jaden Daniels area as well. But I have him for 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. That's 10.4 fantasy points per game. Now, I am drafting him quite a bit because I do think he's a good player. I think he has that kind of consistent production that you want. He's a guy you love to have in redraft because he's going to get 6 catches for 90 yards every week, and you're going to be perfectly content with that. And he's going to chugga along and be just a consistent force in your team. I'm curious to see how high you have him. I think it might be a little bit higher than me.
No, I'm actually not higher than you at all. I love Terry McLaurin. I've drafted him for years and years and years. Last year he got me. Last year he looked promising, and then he didn't play that much. So right now I have him for 800 yards, and only where did I lost it? 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. Not that high. The guys going around him, like we talked about earlier, Blake Neighbors I'd rather have, Jalen Waddle I'd rather have, Mecca Mbuka I'd rather have, Luther Burden I'd rather have. So I'm not that high on him this year, just because last year just showed that injuries caught up to him. He's getting a little older now. So yeah, not as high as you. Not as high as you.
Wow. I expect you to be a little bit higher there. That's very interesting to see. And you kind of mentioned the tight end room as well. I want to go there. Chig Okonkwo is the new tight end in Washington, and people are excited about him, but I think it's just because of the lack of other options more than anything about Chig himself. Getting run out the door in Tennessee isn't a super positive sign. I have him for just under 7 fantasy points a game because I think he could see 85 targets. Like, I legitimately just don't know who else is going to get targets on this team. I have him for 630 yards and 4 scores on 60 catches. So it's a fine season. He goes late in draft. That's the thing with these tight ends. It's like, man, they're going so late. It's like they're drafted. All these guys feel like they're drafted at their floor. We've got to be wrong on some of these guys. But what do you think about Chig?
I really don't have a great opinion on him. I have basically the same as you: 600 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 60 completions, 60 catches, and no really opinion. Like you said, he got ran out of Tennessee. No one else around him, so he's gonna be there on the field running routes. If you wait late, he might be a steal of the draft. He could be a sleeper late, but I really don't have an opinion on him.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And something that a lot of people are having a lot of opinions on social media is the running back room in Washington, where it's Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and then former Buck Rachaad White was brought in. Now, you look at that on paper and you say, well, look, Rachaad White's been a career backup. It feels like for the last 3 years he's been an RB2. He's going to be the RB2 behind Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, right? Chris Rodriguez is out the door. He's in Jacksonville. So it's like, okay, that's where it goes. But now we're getting reports that, maybe Rachaad White's a 3-down back. I have no idea what's going on. I still have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. I feel like I say the full name every time. It's a nice name. I still have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt projected as the 1. Now, if we start finding out more health stuff or something like that, I'll absolutely slide him down. He's going around Chris Rodriguez right now. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is. Rachaad White is being drafted ahead of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in best ball. Mm-hmm. He's more of the receiving back. I have White with 45 catches, which is huge in the half PPR, 300 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. I have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt with 855 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns. That's over 7.5 fantasy points per game. Now, mind you, I have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt predicted for less points than Tyrone Tracy, but I feel like Rachaad White's being way overdrafted.
I totally agree. I think Bill's going to have a better year, and I love the nickname Bill. But yeah, I think he's gonna have a way better year. And like you said, he's getting drafted after. I don't know how that's happening. But White does have that appeal of the pass pro. And Bill's more the running back, but I think Bill's gonna have a better year. I have him for less yards. I have only have 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, but Rachaad White only has 440 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. And Rachaad White has more passing, like you said, but I agree with you. I think Bill's a better running back there.
Yeah, and then the last player here, Jaden Daniels at quarterback. I mentioned I was a little low on Terry because of my projection with Jaden Daniels. And I have Jaden Daniels for just over 18 fantasy points a game. That comes from the rushing. I have him for 726 yards on the ground. I mean, he's the RB1 on this team. And that's not like a diss to Jane Daniels. I just think he's going to run the ball a lot this year. I'm projecting a bit of a bounce back, 6 touchdowns. A lot of people are, though. That's not a hot take by me. He's being drafted sometimes as a QB3 off the board. I only have him for 3,500 yards, which isn't a low number, but 22 touchdowns. He hasn't proven he's a big touchdown quarterback, and I think that's kind of the limiting factor for Terry McLaurin, whoever signs there in Chigakonkwo, is that the touchdowns aren't necessarily going to be there from Jane Daniels. I think he has a good overall season. I think it's a very successful season for the Commanders, but I could see you being disappointed with his season-long production if you draft him as the third or fourth quarterback off the board.
Well, I like him as a fourth quarterback off the board. I would say if he's there as a fourth quarterback, I am drafting him. I like him. I think he has a bounce back year coming off a big injury. But yeah, I have him at 3,600 yards, 700 on the ground, about 24 passing touchdowns and 7 rushing touchdowns. I think he has a bounce back year, and I think he leads this Commanders offense like he did his rookie season. And I nothing else to say. He doesn't have the best receiving room, but I think he does a lot with his legs. And he goes on from there.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. You pitched a good question. I want to throw it to you first now, just since you've done that. Who are the guys you're drafting heavily, you're targeting, you're maybe reaching for, and who's somebody you're not touching? I know we probably touched on it a little bit while we talked about it, but I am curious just for the close up here. Who's the guy that you're reaching for, and who's the guy you're not touching?
I would say, I told you, if Neighbors is there in the third round, I'm taking him. So I would say Neighbors is definitely not as that's a reach, it's not a reach, but it's a guy I'm drafting a lot of my leagues, a lot of my drafts. So I'd say Neighbors is a guy that I'm drafting a ton. And a guy I'm not touching, honestly, I think Devonta Smith. We talked about receivers a lot this episode. I'm going to stick with 2 receivers here. I think Devonta Smith, he's getting drafted as a wide receiver 13 for me, 11 to 14, he said. I think he's getting drafted way too high. He hasn't been a receiver one his whole life in the NFL. So I think it's going to be a different game for him. And, he has weapons around him, the young weapons around him. So Jalen Hurts didn't look too good last year. I think Smitty's getting drafted too high. What about you?
I think that's very fair. I don't have too much Smith, and I'm going to avoid talking about Neighbors, but I'm gonna give you 2 for each here because I think I like it a lot. There's a couple guys I like a lot and a couple guys that I'm allergic to right now. But Ryan Flournoy is a guy I'm drafting quite a bit. It's upside. Like I'm hoping to not play him. He's a guy in redraft. If I'm drafting him, it's like, okay, I don't want to ever have to put this guy in my lineup. But man, Lamb's been injured. Pickens has been injured before. This could be a guy that you just plug in and you're just so excited that you drafted because he's going to be, if you don't draft him, he's going to be on waivers. And then it's the hot waivers guy that everybody wants because, oh man, it's Ryan Flournoy. He's the 2 now. He had, 4 catches after Pickens went down in the fourth quarter, something like that. So he's one. Tyrone Tracy's the other. Tyrone Tracy, I feel like the value is great at pick 44. I had to stop drafting Tyrone Tracy in best ball because I was having too many shares of him. Where it was, man, my whole season in best ball is dependent on if Tyrone Tracy is good or not. So Tyrone Tracy, I was drafting a ton. Guys, I'm avoiding. Like I said, I'm going to avoid talking about Malik Neighbors, but I am going to talk about his backfield make of Tyrone Tracy, and that's Cam Scatterbo. Because I'm so in on Tracy, I am out on Scatterbo at the draft cost. I think Scatterbo could have a fine season, but man, I'm not paying the early price tag, the RB19 price tag for him. I would much rather Javonte right ahead of him, or some of the guys going behind him. David Montgomery's going behind him. I'd much rather either of those guys over Scatterbo. And the other one's going to be another running back. It's going to be Rachaad White. I feel like Rachaad White's another guy being very overdrafted. People are excited about him. People are excited about the passing upside. And if Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt ends up there being injury stuff, that could totally change. But for right now, I'm avoiding Rachaad White. I think I've drafted Scatterbo 0 times and White once in best ball just because I'm like, man, I just can't bring myself to pull the trigger on those guys.
Yeah, I agree with you. Rachaad White, it's always when players switch teams, they get that buzz of like, can he turn it around? Can he go from RB2 to RB1 now with the new team that's not as strong? Can he doesn't have Bucky Irvin in front of him anymore. I think players get too overhyped when they change teams, and I agree with you. I think Rachaad White's getting that buzz right now, and it's going to run out quickly. So I agree with you. I would not draft Rachaad White either.
Yeah, and listen, that wraps up our NFC East episode. A little bit of a longer one, which is great. It's great to get back into the field, being able to have a conversation with another person. But I want to thank Aidan very much for coming on to the show today. We'll have the article coming out tomorrow, and today's just Monday, which means on Wednesday we will close out our divisional breakdowns with the NFC West. I'm super excited. Aidan, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.